Good afternoon. I'm Riley Phillips with First Coast News, and we are talking about immigration, the legal immigration process. I am joined by two immigration attorneys here in Jacksonville, Villarca Bilbao and Joanne Fackery. Thank you guys so much for being here today. So we're talking about this. Obviously, the headlines over the last few weeks have been about ICE deportations, new immigration policies, executive orders. So first question is, how have these recent policies, executive orders impacted your firm so far?
We're seeing a lot more calls coming in of people that are afraid, whether they're even U.S. citizens calling about family members, people that are undocumented, or even people that are going through the process. They want to know what they can do, what their rights are. So we're seeing a lot more calls of that coming in.
Yeah, I would say a lot of detention, more than normal, of individuals who don't have criminal histories, who are in the middle of their immigration process, and ICE is detaining them because they are not yet legal permanent residents or not yet U.S. citizens. And so families are worried, families being separated. One of the things that's happening is that the online locator where we find people who are detained hasn't been working. So a person could be detained and you can't find them. You call ICE and they're not giving you the information of where the person's located or where they've transferred them. So it's a bit of chaos, and families are worried and scared. And even individuals with legal status are scared that they could be profiled or potentially jailed or deported.
So even people who are going through the legal process of immigration, getting their green cards, their visas, they're afraid that they're at risk of being deported.
Yes, and there are people that we're hearing that are going through the process and that have gotten picked up. They may have, for instance, like an order of removal, but they have relief that they can apply for, and they're in the process, and they've gotten picked up and even deported. Oh, wow. So it's not just people that have committed serious crimes. That's not happening. Many of the ones we're hearing about have not committed any crimes, but maybe undocumented.
Wow. So the purpose of this conversation is to talk about the process of legally entering the country, and I think a lot of people don't realize just how difficult it is. And we hear a lot of lawmakers throw around the term, people need to do things the right way or stand in line, but I guess what is the right way? Is there even a right way to legally enter the country?
That's a loaded term, the right way. So I think some misconceptions in immigration law is that it's like applying for a driver's license. You go down to the DMV, you can stand in line, wait, and you get your green card. And it's far from that. Immigration law is very regulated. There's eligibility requirements, there's numerical limitations. Only a certain number of people may qualify for certain green cards, and there's many people here that don't qualify. And so doing it, I think when people speak about doing it the right way, they're speaking about someone that may come in on a visa and maybe didn't enter the border without papers and come in and have a way to get a green card. So for instance, I came in on a student visa years ago. I went through all my different programs, and then the company that I worked for after graduate school sponsored me for a non-immigrant visa, which is a temporary work visa. Then we went through the green card process, and then citizenship. So I'm assuming when people say the right way, that's what they're talking about. But the right way could be anything. It could be someone who comes to the border and claims asylum. So they may not have papers when they got to the border, but claiming asylum is doing it the right way. It may be people that recently came in through the last administration allowing paroles, and they came in that way. Well, then they did it the right way. They were permitted to come in. And even people that might have come in undocumented and are here now, have been here for years, they want to be able to get their green card, but they aren't options for them to.
Yeah.
Even your story about coming in with a student visa and going through the whole perm process and being sponsored by a company, that took more than 12 years?
It took a long time. It's years of doing it. So I think people thinking it's like I see applying for a driver's license, it's far from it. Yeah. Nothing in immigration law is simple, Nothing is walk in and get a green card.
Yeah.
And sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say there's kind of three big categories to get a green card. And so before you get a green card, you need a pathway to a green card. Mm-hmm. And so one of the pathways could be a family sponsorship. And there's only so many family relationships that can give you sponsorship. Okay. So your grandparents aren't able to petition for you. Your aunts and uncles or your cousins, they're too far off. It's your parents, your siblings, your spouse, and some children. Not always can your children petition for you.
And that's only if you're a U.S. citizen, because if you have a green card, you can't petition for your siblings. You can't petition for your parents. So it just depends.
There's so many like little loopholes there. For example, a sibling of a U.S. citizen can take up to 20 years to get a green card. Wow. So if I have a sibling that was born in Mexico, but I was born here, if I wanted to petition for them, it takes more than 20 years for them to be able to get that green card. So individuals sometimes are in this kind of waiting gray area where they have pending status, where they have a receipt that they've applied for, potentially even a work permit that allows them to live and work in the United States, but they don't yet have that green card, which is the permanent status, right? So it can get very complicated. And that's the simple one, the family category.
Yeah, and then there's different categories for visas too. And it doesn't, just because you have a visa does not mean that you can then get a green card and become a citizen eventually, if that's what you want.
So I can come in on a visa, but if I don't have a pathway or one of the routes that will help me, for instance, employment. I do a lot of employment-based green cards, and you'll have employers saying, hey, I have a wonderful person here, I really would love to keep them here, and we talk to them and they cannot. The immigration is very regulated. It's very, very regulated. Our laws are in the Immigration and Nationality Act. There's every type of green card you can get or visa has eligibility requirements that you have to prove. And in many cases, you have numerical limitations. So only a certain number per year can apply. And in very rare instances, do you not have that?
Wow. So and very nuanced too.
Very nuanced. It's a very nuanced area of law.
Yeah, for example, some visas allow you to come in and do only certain things. So you might have an athlete who applies for a visa to come in here and to play for a certain team or to play a certain tournament, and that's all they're allowed to do here. Let's say that individual overstays. They now need to find a pathway to get to the green card. That visa that allowed them to enter doesn't necessarily allow them to continue the pathway. And when you have your status expire, that visa, you overstayed now, it gets more complicated because the options that the law gives you are smaller. We don't want to reward people for coming in and overstaying. We want to kind of punish it a little bit. So the options that they have are even more limited. So as people maybe overstay their visa or commit other errors in the United States, maybe now you got caught driving without a driver's license and had an arrest for that, even though it's something minor, now that has an effect and it limits what you're able to get in immigration. So it's extremely complicated. I've never met an immigrant who doesn't want to have their green card. It's so complicated that, I mean, even as attorneys, there's a lot of us who only do one very specific area because if we dabble in too much, it gets too complicated.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. So you said 20 years. It could take up to 20 years sometimes for someone to get their green card, and then they have their green card. What if they want to become a citizen? How long does that normally take?
So I think Mexico is even up to 24, and last I checked for a sibling for the green card. So getting to citizenship after you get the green card, in most cases, it's going to take 5 years of being having the green card, but in also meeting eligibility requirements. For instance, being in the U.S. that length of time or a certain amount out of that. Or in some limited cases, 3 years, such as marriage to a citizen, or if you've applied under some other humanitarian way, such as VAWA. But it's either between 3 and 5, and the majority of people, like employment-based and things like that, are 5 years after the green card.
Have you all noticed the length of time, the processing time, the length of time to get a green card or a visa? Have you noticed that increase over the last few years? I know COVID did really put a strain on some of these systems, but has it gotten worse or better?
I think yes and no. It's gotten worse in some areas, better in some. So Joanne talked about numerical limits. There's certain visas that just have a certain number available each year, like the U visa for victims of crime who cooperate with the police, and law enforcement then certifies them that, yes, you cooperated with us, we want you to be able to stay here. There's 10,000 visas of those per year in all of the United States. Wow. That means 200 people per state if we divide it up equally. I don't know if that's how they divide it up. There's the wait in 2018 used to be around 2 to 3 years. Now it's about 7 years under that category.
Wow.
So if you are a U visa recipient or a U visa applicant and that's what you're waiting for, you're in line and you're waiting until that. And the government really can't do anything because Congress has a numerical limit. For visas, for T visas, for victims of trafficking, we have the same 10,000 limit. So it gets dicey. Some categories are slower. There are other things that have gone faster. For example, I would say asylum receipts and asylum work permits have been optimized by USCIS, the U.S. Immigration or U.S. Citizenship. And those processes are faster than they were 3 or 4 years ago because it's almost automated. But it just depends so much on the category that you're applying under.
And that's the receipts, but to get through the process still takes several years, and it depends how you're filing the process. Are you able to file, for instance, for a green card, or we call it adjustment of status in the U.S., versus if you're doing a family-based or employment, or are you out of the country and having the consular process, which can take significant more time, or you in immigration removal proceedings and having to do this in front of an immigration judge. And with all the backlogs there, you're finding cases now that are taking several years throughout the country, so it's inundated. I do think in some cases it is taking a lot longer. I'm not sure I would ever tell somebody it's quick. Even something that might look straightforward, and in immigration, even marrying a U.S. citizen, let's say I came in legally or with a visa, I married a U.S. citizen, and we hear that might be the easiest way. There's so many eligibility criteria, not just on the foreign national, but on the petitioner or the person sponsoring, and you have to meet all of those. And let's say it goes smoothly, you're still at a minimum. I think we're now seeing them going back, depending where you live in the U.S., about a year. And if you're married to a citizen and you're outside the country, people are separated for a few years because of the consular processing issue. Step one of that, if you're filing a green card through a U.S. citizen spouse, and I'm emphasizing U.S. citizen spouse because right now if you are the spouse of a permanent resident, there's numerical limitations and there's backlogs, so it's taking a couple of years. But if I'm a U.S. citizen and my spouse is abroad, I cannot file the green card and the petition for alien relative together. It's called an adjustment package. I have to do it in steps. And right now, step one, which is the I-130, is taking, I think last I checked, well over a year, about a year and a half, going on 2 years.
Wow.
18
And that's just the beginning of the process.
Yes,
wow.
Before you can get to the consular processing and then to the interview.
Okay. And then all of this also costs money. That's a whole other issue that people who are trying to immigrate to the United States face.
It costs quite a bit of money, I think, but I will say that I think that there's very few immigrants that if they can get legal status would complain about paying. They will find it to pay, and they would like to find a way to remain here. Even the filing fees at immigration can be pretty steep. For instance, a family petition, if you're applying for a green card, and you're doing the petition for alien relative, the green card, work permit, and a travel document, it's about $3,005 total.
I know we've talked about immigration reform. Why do you believe there is a need for reform?
Oh, there's so much of a need.
We could talk for hours.
Yeah. I think it's that the laws that we have don't reflect the needs of our population. We have numerical limits on things where it's too little for such a big country and the population that we have nowadays. It also isn't reflective of the workforce that we have in America, the new needs that are technological, new types of careers. There's individuals who are in countries that have to wait more than 10 years to be able to get a visa, and that's because we have a cap, not only on the visas themselves, but on how many people can enter from a certain country every single year. So all of those things, they're not working for the modern day today America. The other things is that we could do so much better. Some of these laws, I mean, are from the 1920s. We were just talking right before getting in here. There's something called the registry, which allowed a person who was here in the United States legally prior to 1972,
Yes.
Who has no criminal record, who is otherwise has good moral character, they could apply directly for a green card. That registry hasn't been moved since that era.
That was extended in '86 the last time. The registry started, I think, in the 20s, I was reading, and it was, the time was extended, I think, 3 or 4 times. And then I think the last time where they started, if you entered in 1972. So think about it, someone would have been here in 1972, and in '86, I believe it was at Paso, 14 years, undocumented, was allowed to self-apply, to self-petition to get a green card. So we say, and some people would argue, well, why are you allowing people that came in here without a visa to get legal status? They're here. They're productive members of society. On the contrary of what we think of people crossing the border, the majority are not criminals. The vast majority, people that are here, fleeing certain issues back home or have family members here they don't want to be separated from. Our immigration system needs the reform to be able to keep family together. A lot of these deportations, separating families, sometimes the primary breadwinner. It's also creating problems in the workforce. Many of the immigrants here own businesses, restaurants, contributing to the economy, taxpayers. So when you remove all these people, you're removing money from the system, you're removing employment, you're separating families, you're creating a lot of mental health issues for US citizen children. So we're not talking about let's reward people, we're saying many people came in, they were permitted to come in, whether they did coming on their own or recently they were permitted to come in, they're here. Rather than spend billions of dollars on mass deportations, building new jails, because I don't see how you're going to house these people in the jails we have right now. We're hearing that those are over max capacity. So rather than spend taxpayers' money on that, why don't we try to legalize productive members of this country, those that have been here 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, and give them a path to citizenship. We have many people that have some status here, temporary status like TPS, temporary protective status, or DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. But these are temporary. There's no path to get a green card from that. And they're here, and they're trying. But our immigration system needs reform. So.
Yeah, I was going to talk about those temporary programs because we think about, okay, well, I may have status. There's for example, Venezuela, they just rescinded TPS for Venezuelans. For a certain period of time, if you were Venezuelan and had arrived in the United States, you could ask for this protection, and on an 18-month basis, they would approve you to be able to remain lawfully in the United States. Well, that has just been stripped away. That program is no longer going to be renewed.
Instantly. Hundreds
Hundreds of thousands of people, I think it's like 600,000 people were in that program, are no longer going to have the status that they were offered. And of course, it was always a temporary status, but there's no pathway for us to jump from that into something permanent. And so that's where our immigration system needs some sort of reform, where we can say, okay, these individuals who are allowed in on these several programs from different presidents, different executive administrations, how can we legalize them and allow them to get to become green card holders and then citizens eventually? And of course, many of them are going to be able to because they didn't commit crimes, right? Mm-hmm. Those who are committing errors here, they'll be kicked out because of the things that they do, right? But most people are here just trying to live a good life, live that American dream that everyone wants to have.
And are very productive. I mean, it's not about rewarding people that are here undocumented. It's about what's in the best interest of this country. And the best interest of this country is to keep productive members here. If you remove everyone here, the void is so great that I don't think many of the politicians are viewing that in the capacity that they should. You have U.S. even military members that are serving our country and deserve us to, think about them and how much they've sacrificed. They risk losing family members. So, those are things that we need to think about because we're dealing with this problem now. Should there have been immigration reform before? They were over the years, very minor ones. I think one of the biggest one was in the 80s. And that was enforcement-based reform. You had a few amnesties that came in, but putting in right now, fast forward where we are right now, our needs are different. The country's needs are different.
And there are people, though, who say that it should be difficult to become a U.S. citizen or to get a green card here. I mean, what do you have to say to that? I don't know if those people realize just how difficult it actually is and how we are working with laws that were made, during the 80s and the 90s.
I agree it should be difficult, but it is. It's regulated. The eligibility requirements are very stringent. It's not that I go apply, a person offers me a job, I apply and I get it. Absolutely not. If you even just an employer with someone with a degree, just all the eligibility requirements you have to meet by themselves make it difficult. So it's not easy. And I think people that say that don't understand the immigration laws, and that's part of the issue that we face as attorneys, the frustration.
Yeah, the other thing is immigrants get judged here twice for every single thing that they do. So an immigrant who, for example, has a DUI and goes before a criminal court and pleads guilty or fights that case, doesn't matter, right? That individual is also going to be now in front of immigration for every single step until they become a citizen. That minor crime or major, whichever it is going to be strictly looked at. And they can be disqualified for some of those behaviors. So maybe just driving once without a driver's license might not fully disqualify you, but I've seen individuals who have been arrested for no driver's license and have been deported just because of that.
And use visas for a DUI. There's college students that may come here, or even on H-1B non-immigrant visas, and they have an arrest, a conviction for a DUI. Chances are the consulate is going to cancel the visa or refuse to renew it. So there are penalties. It's not that you commit a crime and you're fine. That's not true. The Immigration Act has several crimes that instantly bars. And
anything domestic violence related, for example, that's a no-go.
Very difficult. Yeah.
That person almost always is never going to be able to get immigration relief. Fraud, things that have to do with abusing minors, right? Like there's categories of things that are so horrific that we know we're never pardoning those. You're not going to be a part of our society in America. So the law already accounts for that. What's happening now is that even very minor things that can happen to anyone are being punished. And then also the fact, we call it in my office driving while Hispanic. We think that people are being stopped because they are being racially profiled. You look like you could potentially not have legal status. And it's a very dangerous, slippery slope that we're going if that's permitted, because those are not the values of America. They're not the values of our Constitution. There are legal processes that allow individuals to be here with status pending while their case gets decided. And we shouldn't just cut those opportunities off to individuals because they don't have it right now, when they are in the process and they can prove that they're in the process of getting their paperwork.
Yeah. Were you seeing that before the ICE deportation started 3 weeks ago?
I would say sometimes, but very rarely.
Okay,
very
rarely. Something that's been happening recently.
So I do want to point something out. I don't think you'll speak to an immigration office attorney that's not for enforcement, that doesn't believe in strict. I believe in strict laws. Every country needs to have strict laws, but not impossible laws. And it's one thing to say we're going to get rid of all people that committed serious crimes. We all want border security, but we don't want to separate families. And If you're asking if we're seeing this happening more, yes, because if you're in pending status and that you're waiting for a benefit, then that's what the system was there to do. But we're hearing of people that are waiting for benefits that are getting picked up.
Picked up and removed.
And removed.
Yes.
And removed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I liked what you said during our initial interview about, this has become a very political topic over the last 2-3 decades now, and it really isn't political or shouldn't be political. But both sides kind of make it political.
I blame both sides. It doesn't matter what side you're on. Immigration, each time you have an election, immigration is always on the forefront.
Mm-hmm.
And it shouldn't be. These are people's lives. Each side will say, this is what we're going to do. Let's talk reform. And Congress doesn't. And just to make it clear to people, the president cannot, he can have an executive order, but he can't create immigration reform. That's Congress. And so that's who we need to be reaching out. But it is very politicized. And it's unfortunate, and it shouldn't be. And what ends up happening is you have sides debating issues when really most people probably want the same thing.
Yeah, that's very true. And I'm sure most people don't understand what they're, debating on or debating for, or things like that.
And we discussed this earlier. There's a misconception that Democratic presidents, there was no deportations through them. Even during Biden, there was some. And I think President Obama was known as the deporter, as having deported.
During the Biden administration, we saw deportations being opened up to Cuba, which for a lot of years we had no deportations to Cuba. So Cubans, even those who committed violent crimes, were released because Cuba wouldn't accept the people back into the country. And so during the last administration, we saw flights. We're having one flight coming out of Miami every single month with about 40 to 60 Cuban individuals being deported. I think part of the issue is the fear that's being spread to the communities, the fact that it's being televised in such a way, the fact that we're using military aircraft to deport individuals when that has not been the case before. That fear, I think, is purposeful, and it's driving individuals to not want to stay in the country. I've had clients who have said, I don't want to put my family through this. I don't want to live in hiding. I don't want to live afraid. We're going to go back to our countries and eliminate our application. When they have something that they can get a benefit, but it's 4, 5, 6 years away, they're going to have to live in fear for all that time, right? Or with the threat of being deported. So I think the politicizing of this issue is problematic, because then we're not getting to the root of the issue, which is sitting down and looking at the laws and seeing, is this working? Is this not working? What can we do to make this better? Are there more people who need protection because we have more trafficking victims, for example?
Correct.
We might need more visas under that category. Why don't we correct that, right? And because it's being politicized, it's just, we're not doing the work that's required.
With immigration reform also, if you make a path to getting a green card, or you're getting more money into the system, because when I apply for an immigration benefit, the majority of them, almost all of them other than some of the victim ones, require filing fees. And so you're generating income there. Again, as I stated before, they're paying taxes, they're contributing. And so if we want to put this country first, that's the way to do it. We hear the argument that people that cross the border illegally are criminals. They've committed a civil act, not a civil violation, not a criminal violation. And so when we call them criminals, yes, it is a violation, but we need to think about what we're saying and the labels we're placing on people. Most don't have an option.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's ever really been explained, that if you're crossing the border, it's not a crime. It's a civil violation. I have not heard that.
And not only that, it depends on the circumstances. Most people that I meet that have crossed the border are crossing and sitting down and turning themselves into immigration.
Correct.
It's much different than a person who's crossing the border and running away from law enforcement, trying to smuggle drugs or do something else into the country. Most individuals who are asking for protection are sitting down and maybe waving immigration down. Hey, we're here. We need to be processed. And the reason why they do that is because in the ports of entry, they're not allowed in. And if they stay in those towns, there's too much cartel violence for them to be able to to stay. So the circumstances on how people enter is also very important. Asylum is one of those big topics that we hear so much, but it's good to understand where it comes from. The law of asylum comes from World War II, when Jews were murdered, and Jews were leaving their states, their countries, and going to other places and asking for protections. And those countries didn't have protections for those individuals. The whole idea of asylum is that you are being harmed in your country in some way, and you are knocking on our doors to get protection in the United States. And so when somebody comes in here and requests asylum, not only have we made that a law in the United States, we've also signed international, the Declaration of Human Rights, where it's an international law, the asylum law. We even mimic the same language in Congress of what we wrote in asylum law to what the international law is. So we recognize this inherent human right that an individual who's not from America can come in, knock on our doors, ask for help, and we have a legal process to allow them to ask. Now, whether they win asylum or not is a different story. Winning asylum is one of the most difficult things to do.
Is it? Okay.
Very
because
difficult.
I would say 90-something% of the cases fail and fall through the cracks. And it's because they create crazy evidentiary burdens that individuals sometimes can't meet. But that's why asylum law was created. So if we decided that we are no longer going to accept asylum seekers, or we are no longer going to allow individuals to apply for asylum on our southern border, it goes against not only our own local law, but also international law that we've agreed to and that we recognize is an important part of human history.
Yeah.
And when Valerka mentioned that people are coming here because they're escaping harm, it's a lot more than just saying, hey, I'm afraid. You have to be in fear persecution. So it's a very high standard as well, based on 5 different grounds, based on political opinion, race, religion, social group. I mean, so it's not like I can just come in and say, hey, somebody hurt me in my country, I'm coming in. And you have to also show that the government or police or whoever couldn't protect you. So there's a lot of different requirements to asylum. It's not just coming and filing. The same as refugees. So asylees and refugees are pretty similar. Refugees go through the process outside and come in and meet those requirements outside. In third countries, they can't obviously be in their country, but they go through extensive interview process. So it's not a very simple process to do asylum.
They're often waiting years for refugees. So the idea of a refugee is you left your country, you went to a third country, you applied there for the same asylum law because it's the same standard, it's just you're outside. You go through the vetting process outside of our country and waiting years, and then we approve you to come in, and then there's also a cap on numerical, how many people can come in every year.
Right, yeah.
So you might be approved, but right now I think the cap went down to 10,000 a year
really
or 20,000 a year.
And is that per country or just
Worldwide.
Oh, worldwide. Okay, wow.
Okay. So you might have been an approved refugee for the United States right now living in another country, and because that numerical limit has been reached, you can't come into the United States yet, even though you've already proven that you qualify for this. So those are all the things where when we talk about reform, there's all these little points in the law that we can say, we can make this better, we can make that better, right? And that's where it's so important that Congress gets involved in this and not just a political play in what would be the best for the United States, for our population. How do we allow cities to grow? How do we welcome immigrants so that we have vibrant communities, so that we have good economies? We need that influx of people coming in.
Together.
Yeah.
We do. Investors, people that open. I have several clients. I do a lot of employment business, and I have several clients that have, or potential clients that have businesses and are employing people, but I can't help them get status, even though they have businesses. And even though they may be eligible because they may be from a country that there is a treaty and they can get an E2 non-immigrant investment visa, but they might have overstayed. And so they have these businesses, they've been here for decades, and or for years, and there's nothing we can do. So why not let them?
Yeah, they already have a business
Correct.
here.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So-
they've been here a while.
One concept in immigration is a waiver, which is basically a pardon.
Yeah.
Like I made this mistake, let's say entering the border without inspection, and now I have a pathway to get there. But before I get there, I need to ask for this waiver. I need to show that I am sorry for what I did. These were the circumstances under which I did.
I came in illegally, but here's a waiver for me to remove that. But that's only in certain circumstances.
So one of the ways that we could reform immigration is expand the types of waivers that are allowed. What you just mentioned, an individual who would otherwise be able to apply for an investor visa, but made one mistake somewhere, maybe let their visa expire. Right now, there's not a waiver for that. Why don't we have a waiver for that when this individual is clearly someone who is productive in our communities, employs maybe even US citizens, right? Hasn't really done something criminally wrong. Why don't we have an administrative process that they can also ask for a waiver for that? The other problem with waivers is sometimes it requires a qualifying relative.
Correct.
So sometimes in order to get this pardon, you have to show harm to your US citizen spouse, US citizen parent. Sometimes the harm to your child doesn't count. So there are ways in which we could change those laws to allow for more waivers to happen so that even with the existing laws that we have, more individuals could get through and get the benefits that they need.
So maybe expand them. So the waiver she's speaking about is for the unlawful presence. Let's say I entered the United States without inspection, and I married a US citizen. Well, one of the eligibility requirements is that I have had a lawful entry. Even if I came in on a visa and my visa expired, as long as I had a lawful entry, I can stay here and in most cases and get my green card. But if I enter the without a visa, or I came as a child without one, and I married a US citizen, can I still do that? Yes, however, here's the waiver, and I can't have any other issues. I file step one, I'm here, and then we can file for that waiver of unlawful presence here. And that's waiver, I have to have a qualifying family member. But let's just say my child petitioned me, and I don't, let's just say my child turned 21, because this is an example. And I entered undocumented, and now I have a 21-year-old child who filed for me. And we got the I-130 step one approved, and now I need this waiver. Why I don't have a qualifying family? Because if I don't have a parent who's a citizen or permanent resident, or a spouse, that child is not a qualifying family. And even if I did have a spouse who's a citizen, the waiver requires one of the eligibilities that I show that the denial of the visa or my being removed would create extreme hardship for that spouse. That's a very, very, very high standard. It's not just that I'm
Hardship.
Leaving my correct.
It's not just normal hardship, extreme
hardship.
Wow, how do you even prove that?
Oh, we get creative.
Psychological issues,
Yeah.
sometimes medical issues.
Medical is the big one.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe showing that an individual wouldn't be able to get the medical care that they need, but a lot of letters, almost putting their lives on paper, because also a lot of these waivers don't have interviews. So an officer never meets you. An officer never sees your life. It's up to their discretion. So you put letters, you describe what's happening in the family dynamic. If you maybe have a child who is gifted and is doing really good in school, or a child who's in ROTC and is going into the military, you put all the information about that family on paper and send it off and hope that that officer really connects with your family and that they approve it fast. And I mean, I've seen waivers as little as 2 years, but also in the 5-6 year range. Wow. Waiting time. So that family's just here
in limbo that whole time.
In limbo.
Waiting.
Wow. Yes.
And immigration is very documentally heavy. So it's sending in we send in sometimes documents of proof that are in the thousands of pages, and writing people have to write affidavits. So it's very, very documentally heavy. It's quite a bit.
Wow. So it's just a lot of steps, a lot of nuance to this whole process. Well, I hope we cleared some things up for our viewers, because, like I said, I just feel like this part of the immigration process gets lost when you see the headlines about deportations and things like that. So I'm hoping our viewers learned learned something about all of this. And I know Joanne and your colleague Rebecca Black will be on our air on Monday. That's airing Monday. Story about this as well. So thank you both for joining me. I think this was very productive, a very productive conversation.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.